Hi everybody and welcome to today's ISE webinar. Today we're going to be talking about virtual careers fairs, and I've got a really great panel for you today, both from institutions that have got experience of actually having run these type of events in the past. So hopefully it'll be a really good helpful session which will give you some really good indicators for the coming autumn. My name is Steve Isherwood. I'm Chief Executive of the ISE. For those of you that have not been on one of our webinars before, I'll just give you a rough idea of the format. I'll act as sort of host with the panel, so I'll be posing some questions to the panel, but we'll be relatively conversational in the way that we approach this. As an audience, because we get so many people logging on to this, all your microphones will be automatically on mute, but we really would encourage you to pose your questions to the panel. They're geared up to answer your questions. If you can use the dialogue box on the dialogue box on the platform, just type your question in there, and then I will relay it back to the panel. I'll try and do it as we go along, but sometimes that just gets a little bit tricky trying to keep an eye on two things at once. But we definitely reserve time at the end for those questions. If you do have a question to ask, I would appreciate it if you keep it kind of succinct. Otherwise, it just gets really difficult to follow lots of text flowing through. Typical boy, not very good at multitasking. So the other thing I'll say about the webinar is that we record them all, so that if you want to go back and revisit some of the topics we discussed, please do. You'll get a link to the recording later on today, and we also put it on our YouTube channel. Also, as part of our response to the coronavirus crisis, we've made all of our webinars and podcasts. We put them in front of our firewall, so they're available to everybody. So if you want to share that recording because you think somebody else might benefit from the kind of learnings that we'll be going through, please feel free to do that. So that's enough of me. Let's hear from the panelists. So what I'd like to do now is just introduce the panel to you all, and I'll go round you all as the order they appear in my screen. Billah unfortunately has got broadband problems today, so something I'm sure we've all experienced at various points over the last few months. So he's here in voice, although we can't see his face. So Billah, why don't you start off by introducing yourself first?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and it's great to be here. So I'm Billah Qureshi. I'm the Employer Engagement Manager at the University of Reading. Essentially, what the team does at the university is that we work closely with a range of employers ranging from all sectors, understanding their recruitment needs, and working alongside our Career Centre colleagues. We partner with those employers with many different events and initiatives to assist them in reaching our talented students and graduates.
Thank you, Billah. Jacqui, can I go to you next? Jacqui is also from the University of Reading.
Yeah, sure. I'm Jacqui Payne. I'm the Careers Information and Events Manager at Reading. And as my title suggests, there's two distinct areas to my role. One is on the information side, so that's managing our front-facing team, dealing with queries from students and employers and staff. And then on the other side of things, I organise our events programme, so that includes our fairs and our workshops.
Thank you, Jacqui. And also we have on this webinar we have the Open University. Ellen, would you like to kick us off from the OU?
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everybody. I'm Ellen Cockling. I'm Head of Careers and Employability Services at the Open University. We deliver all of our services and our education to students at a distance. So we have been working in the online space forever and a day. So we're really sort of keen and excited to be able to share our experiences of delivering to students in that way. We have a really diverse student population, and we aim to cater to their needs too. So been working with employers in such a way as to make that happen.
Thank you. And last but no means least, Emma.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Laws. I'm the Senior Employer Engagement Manager within Careers and Employability Services at the OU. So all of what Ellen said, but just to add to that, that because our students are based all over the place, our remit in terms of engaging with employers is boundaryless. So that's quite an intense task to take on. But also we're looking at ways in which we can engage employers and connect them with students at a distance. So as Ellen says, it's pretty exciting time because finally other people are looking at this as well. So I'm hoping together we might come up with some pretty innovative new ways to do that.
Great, thanks, Emma. And perhaps I can start with you with the first question. As you said, Open University, this isn't just something that's popped up this year. You've been delivering careers fairs for a long time now. So for the audience, perhaps you could just outline what your experience of that have been to date.
Yep, of course. So the context of the OU is pretty important when sort of explaining how we started on our journey with online careers fairs. So just to reiterate what Ellen said, so we've got a really diverse student population. We've got students studying in their sort of early teens right through to their 80s, 90s. So the requirements are really widespread. And in addition to that, the OU is sort of it exists in the ether, so everybody's studying from all over the place. So one of the requirements that we had when we sort of set up the employer engagement team was thinking about how we could put ourselves on an equal footing with BRIC universities in terms of the opportunities that students have to engage with employers. And a careers fair is kind of, it's the key event, isn't it, that you need to look at delivering. So it's actually comparatively recently that we've sort of been running these events, but we started out in November 2018 using a platform called iEvent, which I'm sure some of the listeners are familiar with or have come across before. They service both sort of universities, but also employers or industries which host careers fairs or online events. And we've run about 5 online fairs to date. So it's really been an iterative process in terms of experimenting with approaches and using the feedback that we've received from employers and students and alumni to hone and enhance those experiences. And the platform that I mentioned, we chose to use because as far as possible, we wanted to try and simulate a sort of a real life careers event. So that platform enables us to kind of have online booths and networking areas and an auditorium and such like. So that's been our way of doing it, but it's obviously there are many different ways to skin a cat. So I'm sure we'll hear some different examples as well today. But that's the sort of potted history of where we're at and what we've done so far.
Great, thanks, Emma. Jacqui, can I turn to you and just sort of ask you a similar question at Reading? What have your experiences been to date with virtual fairs?
Yeah, sure. So sort of from a personal perspective, sorry, there's a lot of feedback. I don't know if it's somebody else's mic.
Mic that needs to go on mute. So if you're not speaking, do you mind going on?
Thanks. It's really hard to speak. Yeah, so from personal experience, I've been working in events sort of 15 years, 7 at Reading. Only very recently have I organised anything virtually, so it is quite new to us. But we organised an event in June, which in March was meant to be in person, a normal career fair. So we had to quite quickly change tack and think about how we could run it virtually. So how we did that was we moved to a 3-day event and we asked all employers to run a webinar on our virtual learning environment, Blackboard. And we also utilised Career Fair Plus. Some delegates here today may be familiar with that and have used it at in-person fairs, but we utilised an additional functionality where students could book one-to-one appointments with employers. So that's kind of our first experience really of organising a virtual fair. We felt it went really successfully. So last year at the same event, which was on the last day of term, we had 389 students attend in a 2-hour event. And then for this year, we held a 3-day event and we had over 800 users on the app and over 900 participants in webinars. So that was about 380 unique students that attended webinars because some came to more than one, and about 200 phone calls. So it was quite a different experience running something like that. And I'm sure as we go through this webinar, we'll be sort of discussing those experiences in a little bit more detail.
Sure. Emma, sorry, Emma, can I just nip back to you for a question? Just to give us, I guess, some idea of context. Would the numbers on your platforms be broadly the same or different? with I guess you've got a different student demographic.
Yeah, so I don't know how much people know about the OU, but we have an incredibly high student population because it's distance learning. So we've got about 180,000 students studying with us. But as I mentioned, a lot of them are on different life journeys, so not all of them are studying necessarily for career reasons. But we've had, you know, in terms of engagement levels, in our first, so sort of from November 2018 to November 2019, we had over 10,000 students register and over 8,000 students attend. So the figures are pretty high, but they're also very used to engaging with sort of OU services and offerings online. But it was certainly sort of the highest level of engagement from students that we'd had with sort of any single careers event. So yeah, those are kind of around the approximate figures that we've had.
Thanks, Emma. But both your examples show that you can reach a considerable number of students through these kind of platforms. So, Ellen, just turning to you, apart from the obvious, what are the main difference between a virtual and a face-to-face careers fair?
I would say there's probably sort of three kind of areas that I would say you would see a real significant difference. And obviously, the use of technology. We're using technology to deliver these events, but it's all very different technology. And I think that's something to be very aware of, is that one event is not going to be the same as another. And whilst face-to-face events aren't always the same either, there's quite often a sort of a fairly clear pattern and structure. But I think it will, it's very important when you're kind of talking to partners, whether you're a recruiter or whether you're a university, in ensuring that there's a clear picture as to what that technology will enable you to do, how you work it, and so on. And certainly, I think one of the things that Emma and her team have been really keen to do is provide a guide for recruiter partners to properly understand, how the technology works. And how to sort of navigate through it and so on. So I think that's a really sort of key starter, is making sure that you build in enough time to kind of really understand how to get the most out of that technology that you might be using. And obviously, you can replace your travel to the event and so on, the time that frees up to be able to do that. So I think that's a really sort of key sort of starter point I would make. And then I think the communication, it's a different form of communication. We're all very familiar with using kind of online comms now, and obviously very, very kind of used to using these videos now, but being able to communicate online in having a conversation does take different skills than it does face-to-face. You don't have the body language, injecting that empathy to build some rapport with an individual student when you have no idea about them, is really important to consider beforehand. And certainly I would say that the recruiters that we have been working with are responding to that brilliantly, and that's really great. I think there are in some cases we've kind of felt the need to be a little bit more thought going into how to build that rapport. So I think that's really important just to consider and be mindful of beforehand. So I think that's perhaps a key point I would make. And then I think also engagement is again a different animal. The numbers that you might expect at a face-to-face event and the sort of the level of engagement may well be very different to what you would get at a virtual event. So I think you're looking at starting with new baselines in terms of what your expectations might be, and it might vary depending on the technology. And certainly, we've had a couple of occasions, although as Emma says, we've had some really great figures and really good engagement with students. In some cases, some employers have said, well, I didn't really get many students, coming along and talking. But what we've then found out after the event is that the hits on their on the website afterwards, or to kind of links that have been provided, have gone through the roof. So I think, you know, actually kind of understanding the kind of the whole landscape, I suppose, that comes along with that engagement is really important. And I think, you know, managing your expectations as to, you know, what is possible and what isn't is trying it out and sucking and see to start with, to see, you know, what you get from that. But I suppose as well, the kind of the other bonus of being sat in your office or at home, wherever you may be sat right at this point in time, you can link in and engage with a number of different events in one day, whereas previously, you know, on a face-to-face basis, that's not necessarily possible. And it may vary as to, you know, what type of event and so on, as to how much of your time you need to commit to that. So, you know, I think that's another perspective that I would offer, is just sort of thinking, you know, about that. And certainly one of the things that we have identified in terms of engagement is that we do see a much broader range of students than those that connect with the careers service generally. So the kind of the diversity of the students who are engaging with the online events that we have, the fairs, is certainly is broader than those that engage with our service as a whole. So again, I think developing that more kind of connecting with a more diverse student population is also a benefit of these events. I don't know whether the guys at Reading found the same, but that's certainly something that I would offer as a real positive.
Yeah, definitely. There's I was just going to say, definitely there's much better accessibility for different students. Disabilities are better catered for, and so on. And just picking up on Ellen's point about the levels of engagement, yeah, you can expect it to look a little bit different to perhaps you experience in person. So for our model, we kind of see it as there's kind of 3 levels of engagement from our students. So there's a sort of low level engagement where they might explore your opportunities and so on our app, so all the details about your opportunities, placements, graduate roles, etc. And that's kind of similar to them perhaps just passing by, dropping into the fair, walking around, browsing, but you won't see that. But we obviously get a lot of digital data back from the app, and we know, you know, that our company details were viewed over 9,000 times, but you don't see the students doing that. And then the next level for us would be a student attending a webinar. And I think attending a webinar for, say, 45 minutes demonstrates probably quite a lot more engagement than you might often see at the fair. And then, of course, the one-to-one chats, they're really highly engaged if they're going to have a telephone call with you. And that's probably somebody who's maybe quite likely to apply. So it's just kind of getting your mindset into a different frame of mind so that you understand that just because you don't see hundreds of people doesn't mean that they're not being exposed to your opportunities.
And certainly, I mean, we have a term within the OU. I don't know whether it's something kind of elsewhere, but students who kind of come to online events who don't actually kind of engage kind of I would say verbally, but kind of, you know, in actual sort of interaction, we call lurkers. So, you know, they're there, they're having a look around, but you know, they are lurking, but that doesn't mean that they're not getting something out of it and making that connection, as you say, Jacqui.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing I would add to that is, from our perspective at Reading, is that all our sessions, the webinars, are recorded, so the conversations continue way after the fair's ended. So that outreach will always continue. And those students who weren't able to attend will have the opportunity to go back and listen to the webinar and hear more about the organisation and about the opportunity, as well as looking on the app.
And people do that, don't they, Bill? I mean, it's even something with our own webinars. I've learned this, you know, I didn't think many people would look at the webinar after the actual events, but we often have more people looking at it online afterwards than actually do live. So it's not something to be dismissed at all, is it?
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Jacqui, I wonder if I mean I've never actually taken part in a virtual fair. My employer days are sort of 7-8 years ago when virtual fairs really weren't a thing back then. I mean, and I suspect that might be true for some of the people that are listening to this webinar at the moment. I mean, how do they actually work? What is the student experience like?
Sure. So I guess it's going to vary a lot from university to university. So I'll only be able to talk about my personal experience. But what I found, we've looked at lots of different platforms. Some have chat features, so students can chat directly with you. Some have networking rooms, virtual auditoriums. They might have drop-in sessions, and we use webinars and one-to-one chats. But in our fair, the experience for students is a bit different. Can you still see me? Because I can't see anyone.
No, we've lost you. Don't worry about it. We can hear you. So
Okay.
keep talking, Jacqui.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you could still hear me while I just carry on talking.
You are, yeah.
Yeah,
We're
I
having a
can
few
see now.
technology
Great.
problems at the moment. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't talking to no one.
No, we can hear you. Don't worry. Carry on.
From the students' side of things, I guess looking at the positives, it offers students a bit more flexibility. They can either go to the live webinar, they can watch the recording afterwards. They can book a one-to-one appointment at a time that suits them. So instead of having, I mean, our main fair in the autumn is 4 hours, but quite often they're only 2 hours. Not having to be available for that very short window when you've got to fit it around other things, lectures and so on. It's a lot more convenient for them. Some, I guess, may find a telephone chat a bit more daunting than perhaps going around and browsing an actual fair. So we did ask all employers to also offer an email. So that's also useful for people with accessibility issues. If they've got deafness, for example, they're not going to cope well with a telephone call. So I think there's lots of positives actually. And as Ellen sort of touched upon, if they're in a webinar, they don't have to speak. They can just lurk and just find out information. And just because they don't do something proactive in that webinar doesn't mean they don't go away and then do something with the information. We still offer many of the things that we offer at our in-person fairs, like a prepare for the fair session we offered beforehand, just to help them get comfortable with the new technology, doing things a bit differently. And we just tried to make it as seamless as an experience for the students as possible. So everything was on Career Fair Plus, and it linked out there to our different platforms. So you didn't have to sort of go and look in lots of different places. I think there are another key advantage here actually is that students will probably enter this fair, come to this fair a lot more prepared than maybe some do attending an in-person event, because although you'll get students who are prepared, some will just walk past and walk into the in-person fair and they won't have necessarily done any background reading into your company or research. So I think from that perspective, we can expect to see students a bit more clued up and keyed into what's going on at the event. Disadvantages, I suppose, like us all, there may be some who are not very tech savvy and might find that a bit difficult. Or, of course, students may not have good Wi-Fi and connections, which some of us don't today. So just to sort of consider those things as well. Hopefully most of them can access telephone calls, but we can't assume. And from the employer side, for our fairs, it will depend on the package that you want. So our autumn fairs, we do charge a fee, and we've got different levels of service. So we've got one which you can just do the telephone chats, although we'd advise the webinar, which is the next level, so that you can promote the one-to-one chats really in your webinar. And you can also benefit from our webinar assistant. So every webinar we ran had one of our staff as an assistant and training beforehand. So we do everything we can really to make you feel comfortable with this new experience. It might be a totally new experience to you. It might be something that you've maybe dipped into every now and then. And then our other packages just kind of give you a higher level of visibility on our platforms. So things like banner adverts. We might invite you to take part in some of our pre-event videos that promote it and things like that. So I guess just a word of warning if you're going to look at fairs. I think the vast majority will still charge. They might charge a little bit less, but actually there is still a lot involved in organising a virtual event. And going for the cheapest option. I probably don't need to tell you this because some of you will always go for the best location and an event. But the cheapest option might be a false economy if you don't get the engagement that you want from students. So just bear that in mind. And then, yeah, we got some nice comments from employers from our event saying that they were really impressed and it was well organised. So I think from the employer experience, it was quite positive on our first event, which was really our summer event is normally our smallest event. So it was quite a good one to pilot on, really.
Okay. I've had a question come in from one of the people listening to this. I wonder if you might want to answer this one, Emma. And it's around actually a smaller employer or an employer with a less well-known brand. And I've heard this at some of the employer sector forums that we're running online at the moment. And of course, a smaller employer at a fair that takes place in in some sort of form of big venue, they can rely on people just walking past and something catching their eye and just sort of coming over and wandering for a chat. Have you got any advice that you would give to those smaller brands, not with smaller employers, but maybe a less well-known brand, around how in the virtual space they can still pick up those passers-by, or maybe lurkers, as Ellen called them?
Yeah. So one of the nice things about sort of hosting an online fair is that, as we've said, you may get a much higher proportion of students involved because they can access at any time. So what we've seen from analysing our student data is that actually we're getting a lot of students engaging at level 1, which is kind of year 1 equivalent at the OU. So you're getting people engaging with these activities very early on whilst they're exploring what kind of options they might have for their career. So what I would say is, get involved in multiple events so that you've got that consistent kind of brand awareness strand going through, because you may engage somebody at an early point whilst they're considering what to do. And then maintain that engagement as they continue their studies. And obviously with the OU, we're not really reliant on, students are less reliant on completing their degree before they can go and engage in employment. A lot of them are already employed or looking for jobs whilst they're still studying. The other thing is that the platform we use has got sort of, you have a booth and you upload your sort of information and media and all the rest of it onto your booth. So really think about what you're including, what your messages are, to make sure that they appeal to as wide a range of students as possible, or those that you're looking to target. So interactive content is always really positive. I think as well, we've got the auditorium that I mentioned. So, get involved in recording a presentation, talk about the opportunities that you've got. But that's more content for students to engage with that relates back to your organisation. So the other thing is maybe think about having an organisation name that starts with A, because the way our booths are listed, the A's often get higher views at the beginning. So that's obviously a silly one. But yeah, I would say think about
ABC taxis.
It's kind of, it's kind of relevant. But yeah, think about the content that you've got. Think about iterative engagement, and also looking at, we look at what kind of engagement figures and share the data. So Jacqui was alluding to the fact that actually the level of data that you get from these kinds of events is much higher. So there's a lot more analysis that we can do. So we share the data with the employers that have booths, so we can let them know how well their booth landed, basically. So if you're not getting the engagement figures that you wanted, we can talk about ways in which you could enhance it, or we can look at things that other organisations have done that perhaps landed quite well. Yeah, to summarise, I think about your content, get involved in as many things as you can, and make sure that you have sort of successive involvement. I think doing one event, it can be tricky to get the kind of engagement levels that you would want. So I think multiple participation is good.
Ellen, did I see you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add as well is that, you know, I know we're talking and focusing very much on virtual fairs as an event today, but there are a whole range of different ways that you might have an opportunity to interact with students, different mechanisms, different sort of formats and so on. So I would say that, you know, this isn't your only option as a smaller employer or a kind of a lesser well-known brand. There are other ways of doing it as well that might be more focused potentially. So I would just add that in as well as another perspective.
That's a really good point, Ellen. We're going to be producing a guide over the next couple of weeks that, of course, talks about virtual fairs, but also about all those other opportunities in the curriculum, skill sessions. It's not just about virtual fairs at all, is it? That broad range that employers have to engage with over an academic year will be there very much virtually, I think, coming this autumn. I've had another question, and Emma touched on this a little bit, and Jacqui, I was going to sort of get your view on it as well, which is around measuring impact. So with the shift online, does that mean there's more opportunities actually for both universities such as yourselves, but also actually employers themselves to be able to measure the engagement and get data on students and effectiveness?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, from an in-person fair, we'd generally just get the numbers who attended the entire event. We do know who they are and what degree disciplines they came from and so on, but we probably wouldn't really have any data to give specific employers other than they might take themselves. So they might keep account of who they see or details of who they see. From the app, we can see the number of company details viewed, how often your company was viewed, how many people favorited your organization, so they can star you and then they can find you easily, and you know, how many people have booked appointments with you. So I think the level of data is much better. And then for our webinar side, we obviously know who attended all of the webinars as well. So it's on a much more individualized basis for each company than perhaps an in-person fair would be.
Thanks. We talked a little bit about this so far, and I think people listening would have had some insight into the challenges involved in setting up and running sort of a virtual fair. But Emma, I wonder if you could just expand on that, because I think it would help. There'll be some other institutions listening to this thinking about fairs, but also think it would help employers understand actually what goes into setting one of these up, because it's not, you know, it's not just a question of inviting people to participate and let the thing run itself, I'd imagine.
Yes, and I think before I sort of list these out, I suppose it's worth saying that a lot of the challenges are also what makes these events a sort of positive alternative. So I think it's just that it's still early days. You know, we're seeing at this point, I mean, I'm sure people have seen all sorts of new platforms popping up. So I think we're about to see a sort of new reinvention potentially of the way in which online events are delivered. So I'll sort of share the ones that we've kind of noted to date, but on the proviso that some of them may actually start to get resolved pretty quickly or lead to other opportunities. The first thing we've noticed, and I think this probably applies to face-to-face as well, but no matter what you do, you cannot please everyone. And I think you kind of have to look at what the majority saying, because as I said, we've got a lot of students who work, so we haven't really mastered the perfect time to run a fair. So we run them over multiple days because we sort of have a 24/7 ethos around it. You know, you can log in at any time. You might not be able to live chat with someone, but you can see conversations that have happened. You can ask your question ready for someone to respond to in the morning, etc., etc. But from the very first fair, we got people saying, you know, I work all day, so actually it'd be much more convenient if you could have what we call twilight sessions. So, you know, employers logging in at 6, 7, 8 o'clock to talk to us. So we thought that's fair enough. That's a good request. You know, we know that 3/4 of our students, you know, are working in some capacity, not necessarily doing what they want to be doing, but they've got other commitments. So we tried these sessions, and it was just tumbleweed in the evenings. You know, and I think a lot of us can say with the best intentions, you know, how frequently do we sometimes cancel our evening plans because we're too tired or something else pops up. So we tried this a few times, and we've taken a sort of you said we did approach with the fair. You know, really ensuring that students and employers know what we've implemented as a result of their feedback. But you know, we have had to say to students, we tried it, but unfortunately the demand isn't there. So we still do get that feedback, but you know, we tried to address that. You know, and at the end of the day, it's kind of, you have to look at what the majority are saying sometimes. I think another couple of examples there are, you know, people want very specific organisations, and if you haven't got exactly who they want to work with, I completely understand that can be disappointing, but obviously sometimes that comes through in the feedback as well, or there isn't enough representation from a specific sector. But you know, we've grown the number of participants. You know, our first fair we had with 35 employers, and the last one we ran was just under 70. So, you know, we really have listened to students' feedback and engaged more employers. So I think, yeah, pleasing everyone is probably one of the hardest challenges that we've got. Another thing, a really important thing that I would stress for anybody sort of looking at online events is your approach to safeguarding. Now, we've got pretty slick safeguarding procedures at the OU because everything is done online, and our online forums, you know, are subject to our safeguarding processes, etc. But you know, we have had a couple of instances where it may be students' comments or content on their profile has sort of, you know, raised an alarm bells with us that we've had to address. So it's just thinking really clearly about what your safeguarding processes are and how you address those, and make sure that all the students are kept safe at all times. And I suppose that links a little bit with conduct being one of the challenges, and that's actually on both sides. So I think we all know, I mean, you can see it in the news, you know, when you look at trolling, going online can change people's behaviour, and it can make the most confident of individuals in a face-to-face situation really meek and scared, or it can make somebody who's usually very sort of withheld, you know, quite confrontational, or whatever it might be. So it's anticipating that change in conduct, and the fact that online sometimes can affect the way that people approach a situation that they might do differently face to face. So lurkers is one thing, you know, understanding, as we said, that just because somebody isn't engaging with you directly doesn't mean that they haven't found the answers to the questions that they had on the amazing content that you've put on your booth, for instance, or another student has asked the very question that they had, so they've got their answer and they're still intending to apply. I think also from an employer perspective, one of the things we worked with, and Ellen alluded to this, was sort of working with people to understand that even though you're online, a conversation should still be a conversation. So if a student, you know, gives you a sort of full backstory of where they're coming from and what they'd like to do, it really is appropriate to engage in conversation at that point, rather than just sort of directing them to a job website. So we want them to have that kind of interest in their background and have that back and forth exchange. And also, I suppose from the student side, we've seen a couple of examples where somebody will have spent a long time thinking about what their introduction is, but students may just sort of copy and paste the same intro in multiple booths. So it's thinking about how we can coach them, as you said earlier, Jacqui, thinking about who is this organisation, what do I really want to highlight about my experience? Because you know, I suppose you might do in a face-to-face, go in and say the same thing to every stand, but it's still encouraging them to tailor their approach towards them. So yeah, the conduct bit, you know, we learn with each one, you know, what potential pitfalls there are, and things to learn from, you know, people that have taken a really good approach that we can actually then use as to model behaviour. The technology can be a challenge. Like, you know, I think, Jacqui, you said it earlier, some people, this will be a dream and they're really savvy with it and they know what they're doing. And for other people, it's incredibly difficult to get their head round. And that kind of relates to my first point about you can't please everyone, because we get some things come back, say, this platform's excellent, this is amazing, I've really enjoyed myself, you know, and then you'll have another person saying, I couldn't even get past the login page. So we have really detailed support information for students about how to log in, how to set up your profile. But you know, the technology, it's a gift and a curse, isn't it? So when it works and it does what you want it to, that's brilliant. But it is always worth thinking about what are your contingency plans if things don't go the way you wanted them to, or if we're continuing to work in this sort of disparate fashion that we've got at the moment, what impact might that have on the way in which you run an event? And you can't rely on the sort of, you know, really robust networks that university campuses may offer. And then the final sort of one that I was reflecting on earlier is sort of, we talk a lot about how online fairs are flexible, but I think flexibility can be interpreted quite differently. And, you know, yes, you can log on from anywhere, and, you know, yes, you can kind of engage with lots of different students all over the world, and that's really excellent. But you still need to commit to the event. You know, flexibility doesn't mean you just pop a booth on there and hope for the best, because we are still trying to emulate that kind of face-to-face experience, you know, making those connections, having those networking opportunities. So, you know, when you commit to the event, it is about turning up and getting involved and having those conversations, because as Jacqui said, it's still a lot of work our side. It's not, we don't just flick a switch and everything happens. There's a lot of build up and a lot of that support. So I suppose it's just clarifying when you're thinking about how this is excellent, this event is really flexible, just make sure you have that conversation, you know, with the employer engagement team or whoever it is that you're talking to about these events, to make sure that you've got matched expectations, because, you know, otherwise it may be a different experience to what you're expecting. So yeah, to summarize, I would say, you know, don't worry if you can't please everyone. Think about your safeguarding processes, consider how conduct may be different online. You know, think about how you cater for technology success and failure, and think about how flexibility is interpreted by people that are participating.
Great summary. Talking of technology not working, Billah, are you still there? Because I can't see you.
I'm
but
I'm still here.
I thought you dropped off and dropped back on, because yes, and I think we're all learning that you've got to have backup plans, don't you, with technology? Yeah. So Billah, from an employer's point of view, I guess you know, it'll be very unfair to say employers just rock up to fairs, you know, with some brochures and freebies, and understand, you know, there's a preparation that does go beforehand, you know, FAQs. You know, I know this from my own experience of, you know, back in the days, sort of doing the rounds in the autumn. But from an employer's point of view, what is it that they need to do and should be doing in terms of preparing for a virtual fair?
Sure. So I think exactly what Emma's just alluded to. Prep is the key to make sure we can make it as seamlessly as possible for both employers and students, and that's the aim of it, to match the two up and to make it sure it's as smooth as possible. I think one of the first things an employer should really be doing is, for us, it's looking on the app, which is the first place a student will see their information about the organisation. The conversation we had earlier on in regards to SMEs or a smaller organisation who is perhaps not a well-known brand, how could it really depends on the information they put on, and it's got to be engaging for students to have a look at and want to find out more. So the employer is complete control of that. So it's making sure the app information is as good as it can be. I mean, it's very similar, I would say. It's got to be right, like almost how you would dress up a traditional stand at a careers fair. You would want it to be as appealing as possible, so students would stop and actually think, maybe I want to have a chat here and see what it's all about. That's exactly what I would say the app does. And one thing we do to help boost that kind of visibility up is we do banner apps. It's an additional product. I mean, this will vary from university to university and platform to platform, but there are a lot of add-ons that you could have to boost up your visibility to students. And I think Emma alluded to it earlier in regards to the A to Z scenario. That is a very true fact. And actually having banner ads and something which stands out a little bit more, it helps incredibly. In terms of other preparation, is we also do a very comprehensive joining instructions to our employers. It's absolutely imperative that the employers read it and understand them. We do prepare for the fair sessions with each and every one of the employers who are exhibiting, and we also assign a webinar assistant who's a member of staff who will actually be there throughout the webinars and any other time up until the fair for them to talk to if they've got any problems. So they really must be utilising them. They should attend the training that's offered to them. More importantly, to get comfortable with the platform. And because platforms will vary from institute to institute, It's really important because one platform will be very different to the other platform. For our platform, and I'm sure this is the same for many others as well, they work better on certain browsers. So for example, ours works a lot better on Chrome. So we advised employers all before logging on, make sure they've got Chrome set up so they can fully access the video and audio. And it's little things, but actually it really matters at the end to get that result that they would want and to get the student to have that seamless experience. We also have a screencast as well, which we developed with some colleagues, which demonstrates our platform. So actually, it's great for those who can come on, but what we do know is those who come on to the prepared affair sessions might be in addition to other people who might also be attending or perhaps doing the calls. So we also have other backups for those who possibly cannot attend to also understand the platform, because it's all about preparing. I think it's also helpful if the employer knows who's going to be available from their team to make the calls or doing the webinars, just so they can be available to the webinar assistants, so we can give them full instructions and talk them through what can be expected throughout the session. The other thing I think is it's really important, and we touched upon this a little bit earlier, is it's really important to make sure the slides or any presentation that the employer will be doing are as accessible as possible. There's a lot of tools out there, and we provide guidance on this to make sure they are accessible to most students. You know, with our first fair that we did in the summer term, there was we asked all students to let us know if they had any additional accessibility needs. For example, if somebody needed captions as going along. So we had resources available who could jump into the session and provide that caption service. So, you know, we're thinking about this all the time because, you know, the beauty of doing it virtually, they are accessible to many more students, but we just need to be mindful that we might also need to have additional support available. And again, just going back to the app, with the app, there's a whole breadth of information you have on the app. And it's really important that that's really accurate and the employers are in the control of this. So I would urge, you know, any platform that you use, you make sure the information on there is correct. And it's little things like, you know, does the organization sponsor a visa? And that will be a big, you know, hit for some students, and for others, you know, it will able to the organization to define what they offer, almost the same as, you know, what opportunities they offer, like from internships, placements to graduate opportunities, so they can get the right audience there as well. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. It's really important, but certainly for us, I would say it incredibly worked well because we had webinar assistants who guided the employers throughout that journey, and we had conversations over and beyond to sessions in terms of preparing for the sessions to make sure they were fully up to speed and they understood the requirements.
Is there anything specific they should bear in mind in terms of actually interacting with students that, I don't know, might be different online to doing it face to face?
Yes, sure. So in terms of the webinars, students tend to more use the chat facility rather than talking. So it's really thinking about actually, you know, students, because what we suggest to them is to have a blended webinar. So, you know, from presentation to some perhaps slides, video, etc. But actually a lot of it on Q&A. And generally the Q&A would come from a chat facility rather than the students actually talking. So again, it's just having, and this is where the webinar assistant works really well with the, if the organization doesn't have, they're just doing it as a single person is doing the webinar assistant would almost collate those questions and put them in a succinct way where actually the answer could be, the question would be appropriate to most people on the webinar. Because I think it's something very easy to do when you're doing chat functions, and possibly, yeah, with voice as well, is just aim it at that particular person who answered the question. And I think it's just really important to think about the wider audience and how you can group those questions to make them as helpful, the answers, to everyone who's in attendance.
Got it. One of the questions I had coming through, actually, and this was, I think, more from a university perspective, was actually, and Emma was talking about this, you know, you might have inappropriate behaviour from students, or students not quite understanding how to use the platform. Did you have to deal with any of that? And have you got any examples of actually how you dealt with inappropriate conduct online?
I do,
say from our
unless
perspective,
Billah wants to take this one.
Sure. I mean, we didn't, as far as I know, our students were very well behaved.
No, I'm not aware of any.
But
I shouldn't have said anything.
Over to you, Emma.
You set us up for a story, so.
Okay, yeah. So the instance we had, it's quite difficult because the way students study with the OU kind of becomes a part of their life, I suppose, and it you know, the way they study, it becomes a part of their daily life, and it's sometimes maybe slightly difficult to sort of separate it a little bit more than you might do otherwise. So a lot of them, when they talk about their study journey, is very interwoven with sort of personal experiences or decisions that they've made, which actually makes for some amazing stories and really inspirational sort of backgrounds. But obviously, when they write stuff on the FAIR platform, it is visible for everybody to see. So we have to be really conscious about what they may be sharing and whether or not it is appropriate for a wider audience. So the instance we had was somebody had just shared quite a lot about their medical history, basically, which had sort of led them to make a lot of decisions in terms of their study. So you could see why they thought it was relevant. But we felt that information was a little bit more than what we would feel comfortable being on a public platform. So the students are prepped and informed about you know, the fact that it will be open to everybody. But we basically just we deleted the post, we spoke to the student, we explained our decision and why we felt it was an appropriate safeguarding decision, and they accepted that. So you just have to make sure where you make a decision like that, you're very clear about your reasons for doing so. You know, and we could understand how it happened, so we could obviously explain that to the student. But that is one example that that we had, if that helps to kind of add a little bit of context.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Emma. I had a great question here, actually. I'm conscious of time, so I had a question here from Helen, and I was going to go to each of you for all of this, actually. And it's, what is your top tip for employers participating in the virtual careers fair to get the best out of their experience? Billah, I had a question. Somebody that couldn't see your name, because obviously your video isn't up. So it's Billah Qureshi from University of Reading. So Billah, what's your top tip for an employer?
I think it's the top tip will be just to make sure that the information that's on the platforms, on the apps, are as good as they can be, and think about it from a perspective of, you know, how a student would interpret that information. The students, it's hard. They've got a lot of choices, you know, to choose from, and you know, a lot of the information does seem to get quite confusing over time. So I think it's really important that actually all employers consider the information they put on to promote their opportunities in terms of how it would benefit the student, or how the student would perceive it in terms of making their workplace as attractive as possible for the students they're trying to attract.
Thanks, Billah. And Ellen, what would your top tip be?
Mine would be, make sure from a recruiter perspective that you fully understand the technology that you're going to be using, and that you've invested some time in having a practice and using it and so on, so that you feel absolutely comfortable in that space, because there are so many different technologies out there that you know, they're not all going to be the same. So that would be mine.
Excellent. Jacqui, would you have a top tip?
I guess it kind of encompasses the same things, but I just say be prepared, that old saying. you know, there'll be things like our telephone chats, for example, we intend to be informal. Other universities might expect it to be more like an interview. So it's just making sure that you're kind of au fait with each institution's event, I suppose, what their brief for the event is, so that you're kind of in tune with what students will expect. Because if they're met with something on, you know, on our telephone calls and you start interviewing them, that's not what they'll expect. So it's just to make sure that you're prepared.
This is really unfair, isn't it, Emma, going around and
I know.
going live.
Think of another thing.
So if you wanted to say the same as everybody else, that's fine. But have you got the top tip of your own?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a summary really of what everybody said, but basically you get out what you put in. So the more you understand about the event, the more you understand about the student population that you're talking to. You know, so particularly for OU students, there isn't really a typical OU student, but you know, sort of going in there and talking about all the schemes you've got for young graduates doesn't really land very well, because we've got people of all ages. So, you know, it's understand the event, understand the student demographic that you're going to be talking to, think about the content that you're going to have on your booth, anticipate what people might be interested in, what questions they might have, and converse with the students. You know, be curious about who they are or where they come from. You know, just because it's online doesn't mean it will be any less of a valuable conversation. So yeah, if you're going to participate, I suppose put the effort in and truly participate, and I think that's where you get the return.
Just the same as you would if you're doing a face-to-face fair. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And Ellen, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and we've obviously been talking. This is all about virtual fairs. That's what we've been talking about. There's a huge other range of ways that employers could interact you virtually in this, I guess, in this new world. What, just to give it those employers that might be listening, what might those be?
Okay, so I mean, I think we've touched on some of them already, in fact, because I know Billah and Jacqui have, you know, referred to the webinars that are part of the fair that they've been delivering, and we have those as part of ours too. And you know, I think quite a lot of career services now, not just us at the OU, are delivering a programme of webinars, and that can be a really useful way of not just directly promoting your company, but of also taking part in skills webinars, a bit like a kind of a skills session that you might do on campus. So I think there's a number of different ways, and again, you know, that is the kind of resource that can be recorded, and that students will then look at time and time again. And you know, our usage figures, you know, we know that there's a lot more views after the event than people who actually attend at the live event. So again, it's a sort of an investment of time, if you like. And certainly, you know, some of the things that we use at the OU quite regularly are things like online forums, and those can be sort of tailored or targeted at a particular subject area. And we quite often bring employers into those to respond to questions and to queries. And again, it can be a really effective way of responding to one question, but actually being seen by an awful lot of students in that forum. And those can be left open for a year or so. So, you know, there's a lot of longevity, if you like, to that content, and so on. Things like Facebook chat. I know some areas that have also kind of used WhatsApp as well for kind of sort of small interactions. So I think, you know, there's a number of different ways that technologies can, on quite short-term basis. So, you know, a Facebook chat over an hour, you know, can net quite a lot of interactions, and again, you know, it's up there for people to see afterwards. So, you know, getting involved in some of these other things, you know, involved in the curriculum, where you might kind of guest in a lecture with universities doing a bit more on the online space. There's potential there as well. So, you know, I do think that we're, if you like, we're on a creative cusp here. I think there's an awful lot of potential, and I think over the coming months there will be a lot of innovation around how, you know, we can deliver and we can find ways of connecting. And certainly, you know, having been in a couple of ISE conversations previously, you know, some recruiters already, I know, are kind of providing their own webinar events, and sort of interactive activities and so on. as an alternative way of engaging students and potential applicants. So I think outside the box. Think about what connection do you need, or do you feel that you want, in order to be able to develop the connections with students? Is it at subject level? Is it at a particular on a particular topic? You might be wanting to share how your recruitment practices are changing, for example, and looking at ways of doing that, working with universities to do that. And certainly we have piloted an online insight event as opposed to a face-to-face one, which we have been offering over the last year or so. And that event was filmed on an iPhone at the company's premises. So we were able to sort of really create a great event that we then kind of publicised and promoted and ran through the iVent software that we use, but that was actually filmed on a phone. So you can do quite a lot with not too much technology as well. I think it's about being inventive and creative, and so I think there are a range of different things that can be done. And as I say, I do think that we will be pushing the boundaries over the next few months to really sort of see how we can explore the technologies out there. And I'm sure that there are loads and loads of companies out there also creating new products too. And I know Jacqui and Billah have mentioned the app and so on that they've been using. So there are many products out there, and I think one of the challenges is going to be how universities choose and pick which ones to use. And judging the effectiveness of one method compared to others. But I think there are some fairly standard things like webinars, forums, Facebook chat and things like that are open to many of us to be able to use, and I think those can be really well exploited.
Excellent. And Billah, from your perspective, is there anything else that you can think of where universities and employees might be able to engage this autumn virtually?
Yeah, sure. So we've confirmed our plans for the autumn term now. So we've developed a list of skill sessions that we want employers to be leading on for our students. And we are going to also be asking them to do presentations as well, as they would traditionally have done in the classroom, but do it virtually. We are also working towards getting employers onto campus, in a social distant way. But we are looking, because, we feel that, we don't want to, there's going to be certain students who are going to be disadvantaged by virtual stuff. Who really need that physical interaction, and we want to mitigate that as much as possible. So we will look to put some physical events on as well in a social distant way. I mean, it really just depends on how we get through the summer, obviously, and how the autumn term progresses. But our plans are very much, we've got these in place, which are always obviously subject to change, but we're keen to get employers back onto campus to deliver some of the sessions. And part of our careers package, which Jacqui can just briefly talk about, is it has the options depending on which ones you go for, and you'll get skill sessions as well, which you can deliver, as well as obviously everything being permitted for employers to come onto campus and deliver sessions.
Yes, some of our packages have sessions that you can run in the spring, but also you could have an outreach stand on campus outside. So it's sort of it's easier to distance, and you're fully ventilated outside and so on. So and we have an event gazebo, and we're ordering sneeze guards for that purpose. So yeah, we want there still to be, being a campus university, we still want things to be going on campus for students. We just have to think outside the box really with how we do those.
Literally.
Fantastic. Yes, excellent. Well, I'm conscious of time, so we've gone over the hour. So I can see people dropping off. So I think people are having to either grab a spot of lunch or jump straight onto their next Zoom or Teams call. But it's nice to end up on some thoughts that actually, yes, some of this will no doubt go back into the face-to-face world, though I'm sure a lot of this will stay virtual. So really thanks. That's been a great session. We've covered a lot of ground there. I've had loads of questions come through, and we've covered quite a few of them in the conversation. I was able to ask some of them. But if you've got anything else you'd like to follow up on, those who listen to this, please do get in touch with me, and I can put you in touch with our panelists. So all that remains for me to say thank you very much to Emma, Jacqui, Ellen, and Billah. Really great. Really appreciate you taking your time out and giving your insights. I'm sure there's going to be many more questions and a whole lot more learning that's going to happen as we get closer to the autumn and then roll through it. So as I said at the start, if you want to recap anything on this webinar, if you missed it by the end of today, it will be live on our YouTube channel. You will get a link automatically sent to you via our platform software. And also look out for more. We're going to be doing more on the virtual careers fair space and the ways that you can virtually interact with students as the year progresses. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you, and a virtual round of applause to our speakers. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.